You're listening to Let's Get It On with Big John McCarthy and Sean Wheelock.
Big John McCarthy has witnessed the best that the UFC had to offer.
That is it! Game, set, match! We have a new champion!
Your backstage pass to the world of mixed martial arts and combat sports. Only on the Ignotainment Media Network.
Let's get it on!
Hey everyone, welcome to Let's Get It On with Big John McCarthy and me, Sean Wheelock. Every week on this podcast, John and I give you an inside look at MMA and combat sports, always separating fact from fiction. On this week's program, we'll be joined by the great boxing commentator and trainer Teddy Atlas to discuss the Floyd Mayweather Jr. versus Manny Pacquiao bout and all of the subsequent fallout. John and I will also give you our thoughts on boxing's biggest fight of this century, including the reasons why those who felt that Pacquiao won are absolutely wrong. Plus, we'll examine the troubling story of Veronica Rothenhausler, who has announced her retirement from MMA at the age of 25 after just 2 pro fights due to multiple concussions. And as we do on every episode of Let's Get It On, John will answer your questions. Ask away via email, info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. Again, that's info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. Remember that you can download and subscribe to our podcast on the iTunes Store. For Android, download the Stitcher app and subscribe. And you can go straight to our website, letsgetitonpodcast.com. Of course, last Saturday in Las Vegas, Floyd Mayweather Jr. defeated Manny Pacquiao by 12-round unanimous decision in what was billed as boxing's fight of the 21st century. Coming up here on Let's Get It On, John and I will break down this bout and all of the fallout with Teddy Atlas. But first, John, let's focus on the judging. Now, a wide array of people ranging from former boxing world champions Evander Holyfield and Sugar Shane Mosley to UFC bantamweight Kat Zingano to ESPN Skip Bayless have all made public pronouncements that they feel Manny Pacquiao actually won this fight. Now, no disrespect to anyone, but truly, John, if a person watched all 12 rounds and they believe that Pacquiao defeated Mayweather, then I think they have a complete lack of understanding as to how professional boxing is really judged.
Well, what they're doing is they're basing their scores off of their heart instead of their head. You know, it's a matter of I don't care who you want to win. You can't sit there and judge a fight wanting one fighter to beat another fighter. That's just not the way it's done. And I'm telling you right now, I wanted to sit here and start snoring off of thinking about that fight again because it was actually that bad as far as, you know, the action that was put out. But it was exactly what I told people it was going to be. It was exactly what I thought it was going to be. When you're looking at Floyd Mayweather, you're looking at probably one of the 2 best defensive fighters I've ever seen. Now, defense is boring because it's not fighting. It's the ability to keep someone from being able to score on you. But when you're not scoring, you can't win a fight. And for the most part, Manny had very few rounds that he scored much with, and he got countered. He got hit with a lot of counter right hands. And I'm not saying that Floyd isn't that exciting of a fighter. He's not. He's just an absolute master at what he does in not throwing a ton of punches, but the ones he throws, he lands quite often, and he just slowly takes rounds. He doesn't hurt you, but he slowly takes rounds away from you. And if you're watching that fight, the judges in Nevada got it absolutely right. You know, I mean, there was a little bit of difference in the one of the scores compared to the others, but they all had Floyd winning the fight, and Floyd won the fight.
And John, punching an opponent's arms does not mean a landing blow. It doesn't score.
No. You know, there was a couple times, you know, Manny opens up and you watch where his punches land. They land off the shoulder, they land off the elbow, everything that they're doing is, you know, off the forearm. He's throwing, but he's not scoring. And if you're not scoring, you can't win. And you know what? He had a couple of rounds. And look, personally, if I could sit there and say which fighter is more entertaining, you know, I think Manny's more entertaining than Floyd. I would rather see Manny win that fight because I think it would be great to set up a good rematch. But, you know, I sat there and judged it with 2 other professional, you know, judges at the same time, and we all came up with basically the same score. You know, look at Mayweather won. It was not an exciting fight. It was not the fight that the hype built it up to be, and that was the real problem. There was so much hype behind the fight that it was going to take an Arturo Gatti, Mickey Ward type of fight for people to be happy, and those 2 styles were not in the ring. It was Floyd Mayweather, who is that counterpuncher, a defensive fighter. He doesn't take chances. He goes in and he fights very intelligently, and that's what he did against Manny. And Manny was getting to the point where he's getting frustrated and getting hit and trying to figure out how he was going to come in and attack without being hit, and he couldn't figure that out, and that's why Floyd wins.
Every week on Let's Get It On, we bring you our poll question. You can cast your vote on our website, letsgetitonpodcast.com. Well, John, for the first time in the brief history of our show, I think a lot of people are going to get very angry by just hearing our poll question. You ready?
Okay, let's hear it.
I feel the anger rising. Do you feel that Floyd Mayweather Jr. is the greatest welterweight in the history of professional boxing? I know all of you have an opinion. Vote yes or no at letsgetitonpodcast.com. I'm going to guess that you're saying no.
Come on, he's already the greatest fighter. He says it. Look at what a guy thinks of himself is great, but over the years, you take a look and you look at who he's fought comparatively to fighters in the past, and welterweights. There's been some unbelievable welterweight fighters out there, but the two that are going to stand out to me, they both go with the name Sugar. Sugar Ray Robinson was a welterweight for a while, not for a ton of his career, but he was. The difference between Floyd and what people want. Floyd is probably, I'll give him, he may be the greatest boxer that ever lived. Now, a boxer is not a fighter. I'm sorry. A boxer is someone that goes in and uses his skills to win a fight, win a boxing match by outpointing and being that person that hits without being hit. And Sugar Ray Robinson was a boxer fighter. Sugar Ray Leonard was a boxer fighter. Those two were welterweights. And you look at who they fought during their careers and what they did, I don't think that you can sit there and say that Floyd is a better welterweight than they were. And it's just my opinion. I know which ones I would rather watch by far. I'll take a Sugar Ray Leonard or a Sugar Ray Robinson fight any day over watching Floyd Mayweather. So I may be biased, but there's been too many other great welterweight fighters. Thomas Hearns, Roberto Duran coming up from lightweight into, the welterweight division when he beat, Leonard for the title. Well, there was guys like Wilfredo Benitez. The other great defensive fighter, Pernell Whitaker, he got up into that weight class. He was very much like Floyd. He was that defensive fighter, that counterpunch specialist who was a great boxer. He's just not that entertaining of a fighter to watch, and that's what people want to see. People want to see wars. Now, I don't blame Floyd. Wars, they ruin you. They tear you down. They break you down. They make you less, and they adjust your life. And so I don't blame Floyd for what he's doing. But he's a phenomenal boxer. He's not a fighter.
Well, I encourage all of you now to buckle up, fasten your seatbelts, because in sports media, there's Outspoken, and then there is Teddy Atlas. As well as
Teddy's awesome.
He is awesome, as you're about to find out, as well as having trained world champions such as Michael Moorer, Barry McGuigan, Alexander Povetkin. Atlas has established himself as, in my opinion, far and away the best television analyst in boxing through his work at ESPN. Now, earlier, John and I had the great privilege of speaking with Teddy Atlas. I began our conversation by asking him if all of the negative fallout from Mayweather versus Pacquiao has come as a surprise.
No. Not once I see what the circumstances are, they built this fight as the fight of the millennium, the fight of the century. You take your choice. Whatever they wanted to attach to it as far as the title of it. But first of all, it was disappointing, and there's just so many dimensions to it. I don't know where to start. They drove the ticket market up to an obscene place. Greed was part of that, and they charged $100 for pay-per-view. They put it forward as though this was the fight to pay back the regular fight fan. I kind of laugh when everyone said we got to thank the fighters. You don't got to thank the fighters. You got to thank the great fan base, the lifeblood of the sport, that waited around 6 years to let this fight be relevant, let this fight be possible. And they didn't let it go away, and they believed in it. And they showed their belief by coming out in a way that fans never came out before for a fight, and maybe very rarely for any event to that as far as that goes. And how do they get paid back? They get paid back where the closest they could get to the damn fight was to buy a $10 ticket to the weigh-in, which became a $200, $300 ticket because it hit the secondary market, and that wasn't even accessible for a lot of people anymore. You know, the real fight fans, they could not get near that arena. I was in the arena, and I told on one of the many too many interviews that I did on Sports Center and every other damn show that was out there, I stated very frankly that it looked more like a CEO convention, a hedge fund convention, than it did, an arena full of fight fans. Those were all fight fans. Fight fans couldn't afford that ticket. And, so after all that, and after you got the other, as I said, dimensions to it, where you got Freddie Roach representing, obviously, Pacquiao saying, we're not going to win this fight, we're going to knock him out. So, okay, you're going to knock him out. All right, that's good. And so that makes you even more sure that you're getting the right deal, right? Yeah, you're getting the right thing now. You're getting the trainer assuring you that a premium effort is going to be put forth, an effort that's going to upset the odds, the bookmakers, everybody who's handicapping this fight as Mayweather being the guy that's probably going to win. Here's one of the better trainers for the last decade, and he's still at least the more celebrated trainers of the last decade for sure. And he's telling you his guy's going to take care of business. He's going to knock him out. And so you have that. You have all of this stuff going on. The build-up that is like a Super Bowl, and it was like a Super Bowl. And then when you're going down the runway of the fight and they're getting ready to come into the arena, you see something you've never seen before in this kind of situation. You see Freddie Roach taking selfies. So you're taking selfies. You're supposed to have a mindset that's a different kind of mindset than the normal athletic, venture. This isn't basketball, this isn't baseball, it's closer to football. When's the last time you saw football players at a Super Bowl? And again, make no mistake about it, this was a Super Bowl. This was an event worthy of a Super Bowl, the Super Bowl of boxing. When's the last time you saw football players on the sideline before a Super Bowl taking selfies? Well, I can answer it, never. First of all, it wouldn't be allowed because they actually have commissions in boxing that regulate such things and that make sure that things are kept a certain way, a certain status quo. There's a certain standard that is delivered and demanded. But aside from that, football players have to have a mindset similar to a fighter, a warrior's mentality, a very serious mentality. They're about to go into an arena where there's a chance they're going to get hurt. Very simple. There's a chance that they come off that field with less of themselves that they went onto that field. Same as a fighter. There's a chance you go into that squared circle, that chamber of truth, as I say sometimes on Friday Night Fights, with less of yourself than you went into it. So you have to have a very, very serious demeanor. And they're taking selfies. So put all that together, and then all the money that they're making, unheard of money. One guy's getting $180 million, the other guy's getting 100 or somewhere in that neighborhood. And when it's all said and done, you have a less than satisfying result for a lot of people. And then the fighter that's with the trainer that guaranteed he's going to score a knockout, that was taking selfies in the runway, the fighter says, well, I wasn't 100%. Well, what other reaction would you expect from the audience after everything I just laid out, other than just, just complete, anger, just confusion that they would be hearing like this with all the things that I just said. If you're injured and you have the information that you're injured, which obviously they had, they being Pacquiao in his camp, then why on earth would you be making these assertions, these assertments, these proclamations that you're going to score a knockout? Why would you just be quiet and, if you're going to go forward, just be quiet, not say anything? Why would you be saying? Why would you be taking selfies? That suggests, in the aftermath of this, when all this information comes forward as it has, that suggests that you're just there for the payday. I'm sorry. I don't read people's minds. So anyone gets insulted by me drawing that assumption, well, you know what? You need to rethink how you're thinking, because I'm not assuming anything. I'm just saying that I'm going by the evidence that's documented, that's laid out in front of me. I'm seeing a guy that's supposed to have a certain very definitive concentration, attitude, mindset for what he's about to do, and he looks like he's going to a pro. So I have to say, well, if you're happy before the fight, what would you be happy about? I'm not a Rhodes Scholar. I'm not a Harvard graduate, but I have common sense. I have good common sense. What would you be happy about if you're not happy about the payday? I try to go down the list. You can't be happy about. You can't be happy that you were injured before the fight, right? No, I don't think you'd be happy about that if that's the case. You can't be happy about the result because the result hasn't taken place yet. What could you be happy about? That you got a guaranteed $80 million, that the upside could be 100, maybe 120 million. So I think it's fair if I lay it out that way, that I'm probably into a pretty accurate neighborhood, that you're celebrating and you're acting in a celebratory way before you've gone out there and completed your mission, your commitment, your obligation. So, yeah, I understand very well why the fans are upset, and why a lawsuit, a class action lawsuit, has been brought forward. Matter of fact, when I got off the air, at whatever time it was, about 2 a.m, doing a post-fight for SportsCenter, I said to one of the guys there, when we got off camera, I said, as soon as we finish listening to the press conference of Mayweather and then Pacquiao, which obviously we had to do, we were obligated to stay there and listen to it, even though they went on kind of long, to be honest with you. After hearing what Pacquiao started talking and Arum, and they started talking about his shoulder, when we got done, I said, I forget who it was, but I turned to somebody and I said, there's going to be a lawyer out there that's going to bring a class action lawsuit. It's made to order. Matter of fact, they made a joke. I said, if Aaron wasn't on the other side, he'd probably be that lawyer doing it. He's a former Harvard law graduate, and he always finds way to, maneuver pretty well when it comes to being able to make money. But he obviously he'd be on the defendant's side, so he can't be part of that. But and as far as the anger, the one thing that I'm a little confused about is the anger, if there's anger towards Mayweather. Because I'm not an apologist or anything for Mayweather in any way. He can handle himself. He doesn't need me defending him. And he doesn't care, because he's made plenty of money, and when you made money like that, to a certain extent, there's certain things you don't have to care about, or you're less prone to care about, maybe. You're insulated from certain things. But I don't understand any of the shock of the kind of fight he fought. I said all week long, 2 weeks before, 3 weeks before, 4 weeks before, 5 weeks before, Mayweather's a careful guy in the ring. He doesn't make exciting fights. He got to 47-0 by being careful, conservative, good defense, good counterpuncher, taking very, 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 very few risks. That's his DNA. That's what he does. That's the core of him. I talk about Friday night fights all the time. It's not about your physical ability. It's about what your temperament is. It's about what you call, what you're made up of, how you think. What's in your soul. And that's in his soul, so be careful. He's a paradox. I find him pretty interesting. You need Sigmund Freud probably to figure it all out. But as a trainer, you have to be a little bit of a psychiatrist. So I find it interesting, the paradox of he presents in a way that outside the ring he's done a lot of reckless things. And he's had a very chaotic, if you will, reckless life. And some of his choices are to be questioned by, people that consider themselves people that know what is considered to be better choices or proper choices in life. Some of his choices you'd have to look at and really say, what is the, what was he thinking? But inside the ring, he's been the opposite. It's interesting. Outside the ring, he's been reckless. He's done a lot of things that, as I said, would just make you say, why would he do those things? And and would make you think that there's a certain nature about him that doesn't care sometimes about certain things and has put himself in peril by those choices. But inside the ring, it's like he made a subconscious or conscious sort of effort to say, I'm never going to risk anything in here. This is my haven. This is my one place where I'm safe, where I can make things right. I can make my life right. I can have a life that's protected to a certain degree by the things that I can gain from my success in the ring. I will never screw this up. I will never mess this up. I don't know if it's something that's more innate than it is, as I said, consciously thought of. But it's definitely it's a paradox, and it's very interesting. So anybody who thought that, hey, he's going to fight a different kind of fight because he was taking a sledgehammer and hitting a tire, or he was chopping wood, you're really allowing your imagination to run rapid. And people do that. And that's part of what creates an event for a Super Bowl, for anything, that the imagination of the public is allowed to go to certain places. So if he did that for visuals, then he was a smart promoter. Maybe he did. Maybe he did that for visuals, for people to, again, feel more certain that this fight would be what they hoped it would be, what they bargained it on to be, what they were buying it to be, what they needed it to be. Maybe that was it. Maybe he was smart enough to send out those visuals. But in reality, he was always going to be what he is, a guy that was going to take as little chance as possible in that ring. I always say people born round don't die square. So I'm confused about the people, again, that say, well, gee, I thought Floyd be, more aggressive, or I thought that he would, that would be tantamount to going to a Rolling Stones concert now. You buy your ticket, you go to the concert, and then you complain afterwards. I didn't know that Mick Jagger was that old. Well, are you kidding me? You didn't know he was that old?
Freddie,
what the hell did you buy a ticket?
Teddy, I think the big thing is, if you ask boxing people that, watch boxing, know boxing, everybody was going with Mayweather. Everybody that was part of boxing, really. There was very few that were saying, I think Pacquiao is going to win that fight. And everyone was saying, I don't think it's going to be a real exciting fight. I think Mayweather is going to be that guy that he sticks and moves. He's going to counterpunch, and he's just going to slowly take rounds. But I think the real thing, and this is not being derogatory towards Floyd is a boxer. He's not a fighter. Duran was a fighter. Even Leonard was a fighter. They would stand their ground and throw. Floyd never gets sucked into that game, and I think that's the real thing, that people were expecting him to do something that he's never done, just what you're talking about.
Shame on them. They're wrong.
Exactly.
They're wrong. I'm not a defender of Floyd. He doesn't need me. But Floyd's not to blame here. If you want to blame anyone, you blame
Floyd did exactly what he's done his entire career.
it got him to 47-0, and now it got him to 48-0. If you want to blame and be upset at somebody, be upset at Manny more, because Manny, I said all week about the analogy of the fight, the analogy I made to draw a picture of the fight. I said, when you were a kid, you might have had that guy in the neighborhood that was on top of a hill, and you were trying to get up that hill to get him, and he was throwing things at you. He might have been throwing rocks. He might have been throwing apples if there was an apple tree around, whatever. But he was throwing things, and he obviously had the upper hand because he was on the top of the hill, and he could hit you before you could get to him. That's simple. To me, that's how this fight laid out, that Mayweather was going to lay back. He was going to be the kid on top of the hill. He was going to lay back, and he was going to throw, instead of rocks, he was going to throw right hands at you because he's fighting a southpaw. And the last couple of years, that's kind of what Floyd's been doing. He's been relying on timing guys as they come in with right hands, counter punching with right hands, timing guys, controlling range. You come in 3 inches, he goes back 6. And so the picture that I painted in my mind, and I tried to paint for anybody who asked me to, was that Manny, it would be incumbent on Manny, the burden of making a good fight, but more importantly, because a lot of people, and I agree with you, are going to say, Teddy, that shouldn't be his burden. I agree with you. It should but the burden to win the fight, that's it. That's the key. So they go hand in hand. The burden to make a good fight, okay. He doesn't sign on to say, I have to make a good fight. He signs on to try to win a fight and give his best, put his best foot forward, his best effort forward to do that. Well, in connection with that, for that to happen, he had to be the kid going up the hill. He had to find a way to get inside. If he was going to stay on the outside, nobody with any intellectual honesty would say that he was going to win. So he had the burden to win the fight, to make it a good fight. It was on him. He was going to have to find a way, as I said, to get in that front door without getting hit with the right hand. On his way in, Floyd was going to be the kid on top of the hill, just waiting to chuck that right hand when he came forward. So I suggested, I had even said, Freddie's going to have to earn his money. He's making about $10 million. He's got 10% of 100 is 10, if that's what he made, somewhere in that neighborhood. And for me, I know what I would have came up with. In boxing parlance, the way I put it, I'd have him knock on the front door just before you get to that fire zone, that area where you're going to draw that no man's land, where if you go an inch further, there's going to be a punch coming at you. Just before you get to that place, I would have him knock on the door, feint, draw the right hand prematurely, and then come in clean. Or feint, and then use those quick feet that I thought would be important for Manny to go on the side and come in the side door. But in other words, have a plan to knowing that Floyd is going to look to catch you, because that's his style, to catch you when you're the one taking the risk. He's going to make you pay for that risk. He's going to make you pay for that real estate with right hands again. So when Manny did come in, he didn't have the greatest plan in the world, it turned out. But when he did come in, he got hit with the right hand, he got very tentative. Then there were spots where he got hit it, and then he got past it. But what he didn't do was he didn't fight with an urgency. He didn't make up his mind, okay, I got hit, but I'm still here, and I'm going to get in. I'm going to get in. I'm not stopping now. I'm going to get in. And he didn't fight with that kind of, you want to call it desire, urgency, whatever you want to call it, but he didn't do that. And he needed to do that. He needed to do that if he was going to have a chance not to make a good fight. Again, that's not his responsibility. I get it. But if he was going to win, he needed to do that. And if you're going to say that he was disabled and inhibited from doing that because of his shoulder injury, well, then he had a responsibility to pull out of the fight. But not to let his trainers say we're going to knock him out. Not to take selfies in the runway. And not to allow people that really believed in this fight, and part of that belief was him, of the effort he was going to put forward to go and plug down their hard-earned $100. That's a lot of money for a regular fight fan. And as I said earlier, they can't even afford to go in the arena, so then they pay $200-300 to go to a weigh-in for a ticket that was $10. And they travel, and they get a hotel room. Then it was incumbent on you to say, you know what? All those things that I need to do to win, if I can't do them, I need to pull out of this fight. And obviously, we know why they didn't do that. Again, people say, you're assuming, Teddy. I'm not being assuming, but you don't have to be the amazing Kreskin to figure out that they didn't want to let go of that guaranteed money. And that's where they were wrong. If it was true about the shoulder. And I remember as a kid, there was a song. It was like a funny song. It was something like, the wrist bone is connected to the arm bone. The arm bone is connected to the shoulder bone. The shoulder bone is connected to, it was that kind of song. Everybody heard it probably when they were a kid. And all I know is that the shoulder bone, as far as my knowledge of the anatomy, is not connected to the leg bone. And it's definitely not connected to the brain bone or the heart bone. So my problem is two things. One is if his shoulder was inhibiting him, then what stopped him? It sure wouldn't stop his legs. To win, he had to get close. And if you can't use the right hand, then you got to get close and use the left hand, right? So, because you put yourself in that position, you got in the ring. So you have to get close. You have to play the left hand. What stopped his legs? I know it wasn't the shoulder. The shoulder didn't stop his legs from moving forward. The shoulder didn't stop his mind from saying, I'm going to get in. I'm going to be tenacious. I'm going to fight with an urgency. I know that. And I also know that in the fourth round when he thought he hurt Mayweather, and he might have hurt Mayweather with that left hand. All I know is at that moment when he did, he jumped on Mayweather and he threw a lot of right hands. He threw a lot of right hooks. I didn't see any wincing. I didn't see any hesitation. I didn't see any pulling back. I just saw a lot of punches being thrown. And then when he couldn't land the clean one because of Mayweather's, peekaboo defense at that moment, he backed off. But I didn't see anything. And again, you just go by the eye test sometimes. We go by the common sense eye test. I didn't see anything that suggested that he was disabled. And again, I'm not in his body. I've been in this business 40 years. Been training fighters for all those years. I would never take it on myself to say I'm in another fighter's body. Never. I would never do that. I'm more responsible than that. But again, the eye test. I've been in this business for 40 years. And I also know that I can't remember the last time I got through a training camp after a fight, and we got into a training camp, and we got through an 8-week training camp or 10-week training camp, depending on how long we decided to make it. I don't know if I can ever remember having a fighter 100% healthy. It's the nature of the sport. It's a contact sport. I don't have to tell you that. I mean, it's inherent with the sport. You're going to get banged up. You're going to get dinged. There's going to be things that you're going to deal with. Matter of fact, if you opened up the Webster Dictionary and you looked up the definition of fight, you'd probably see something that said and was related to overcoming. Fighting is overcoming, finding a way. I mean, it's to the core of what we do in this business, what fighters do. They find a way. They overcome. You got the NFL. Again, I made the analogy earlier. I mean, once the my son is the coordinator scouting for the Oakland Raiders. He tells me all the time. He says, Dad, by the time we're ready to start the first game of the season, and of course after the first game of the season, there's not a player on our team that doesn't have an injury in one way or another. That's 100%. It's the nature of the game. It's a contact sport. It means that you're going to get banged up. And if you put yourself on that field, the attitude in the NFL, you better perform. You put yourself on that field, perform. We know you're hurt, perform. And the athletes that do this, a lot of people saying, gee, that's asking a lot. Well, they get compensated a lot. Manny was getting compensated a lot to overcome. And if he didn't think that he could overcome, then he should not have allowed himself to be in a position where so many people were going to be disappointed, but more importantly, feel that they were fraudulated by what they thought they were getting.
Still to come on this week's episode of Let's Get It On, part 2 of our interview with Teddy Atlas. Plus, we'll answer your questions submitted via email, letsgetitonpodcast.com, and John and I will examine the story of 25-year-old pro MMA fighter Veronica Rothenhausler, who says that her 5th concussion has forced her to retire from the sport. With Big John McCarthy, I'm Sean Wheelock, and you are listening to Let's Get It On. Hey, this is Sean Wheelock.
And this is Big John McCarthy.
If you're a fan of our show, then you're going to love the rest of the Ignotainment podcast lineup.
Like the Ocho Man behind the 8 Ball and the Whiskey Philosopher with Jeff Cooper.
You can find these great podcasts and more at ignotainment.com. Thanks again and enjoy the rest of the program.
Let's get it on!
It's the book that Wrestling Observer calls a must-read for any MMA fan. Jonathan Snowden of Bleacher Report describes as riveting and amazing, and TheFightNerd.com says nothing is held back. Pick this book up right away. Is This Legal? The inside story of the first UFC from the man who created it, written by UFC founder Art Davie and me, Sean Wheelock, with the foreword by John McCarthy, is now available to listeners of this podcast at the special price of $12.48. That's far less than you'll pay for the book on Amazon and half price of what you'll pay in store at Barnes & Noble. Buy it directly from the publisher now online at ascendbooks.com and enter the promo code LEGAL50. That's ASCEND books.com, promo code LEGAL50. Learn the true story of how the UFC came into existence in the book that Randy Couture describes as honest, shocking, and enthralling, and that has a rating of 4.9 out of 5 stars from Amazon Reader Reviews. Is This Legal? The inside story of the first UFC from the man who created it, by UFC founder Art Davie and me, Sean Wheelock, with the foreword by Big John McCarthy. Available now online at ascendbooks.com for just $12.48 when you use the promo code LEGAL50.
For all of our listeners looking for great new designs in MMA apparel, look to the new clothing styles of Lambs to Lions. That's right, Lambs to Lions has got new styles with old and new put together. Boxing, MMA, everything. Go to lambstolionsbrand.com and check out their line of clothing.
Now, back to Let's Get It On with your hosts, Big John McCarthy and Sean Wheelock.
Back now to the second half of our explosive conversation with the outstanding boxing trainer and television commentator, Teddy Atlas.
Yeah, well, you know that every fighter goes in, like you were saying, every fighter goes in. None of them are 100%. But the one thing that I saw that really was telling to me almost what you're saying, at the weigh-ins when Manny stood there and went, thank you, to Floyd, it told me something. It told me, you know what? You're happy with where you're at, which is not winning. You're just happy being there. And then when I saw the selfie, I thought the same thing. I said, it's over. He's just happy to be there. He's not there. His being the mentality of a fighter is just not there. He's just happy in the place that he's at because he's making a ton of money.
Yeah, no, that's what I said. You know, that's what I think I said. Is when he took that selfie. Yeah, he was saying, "I've achieved what I wanted to achieve. I'm celebrating that achievement." Which, you know, again, if you didn't know the fact, which you couldn't have known it then, you know it now. But at that time, the only thing you could say is, what is he celebrating?
How many times have you seen a fighter Teddy, how many times have you seen a fighter thank the other fighter for being there? Never.
I mean, not in that sort of way.
No.
I mean, I will disagree with you a little bit. There are times at a press conference, I've been around the business longer than you guys, where sometimes a fighter will say, "Thank you for the opportunity," and that's different. Thank you for that. So I get that. I get it, But that selfie thing is different. That's a whole different thing. But I can see a fight, and I've seen it, as I just said. Thank you for the opportunity to fight you for this title. Thank you for this chance, and that's all. But there was more to it with Maddie. There was something else, and of course, it was proven out now by what we now know. But when you're connected with the selfie, and even during the course of the fight, he kept touching gloves with Floyd, and again, people would say, "Well, Teddy, how do you play?" Listen, you got time to do that after the fight. But when you're in there, and your job is to disconnect the other man from his consciousness, you really, I know you can be a gentleman, and they are. They're not fouling each other. They're not hitting after the bell. They're not picking each other up and throwing them out of the ring. So, but you don't need. It's almost like you're making a concession to say, okay, we're just gonna get through this. We're just gonna. But that's not the deal. That's not supposed to be the deal. But it's almost like suggestive of, as I say sometimes on Friday Night Fights, it's almost like you're making a silent agreement. Like you're saying, okay, let's just get through this, all right, buddy? And again, it's not a fine line. A lot of people, I'm not afraid to say it. It's really not a fine line. It's not like a difference between being barbaric and having still a gentleman attitude and respect towards the other guy. It's got nothing to do with that. It's got to do with the job you're doing. It's got to do with that mindset needs to be to do that job, and the commitment to that job, and the honesty to that job. And when you start doing that, and you're taking selfies, and all the things, and you put together all the pieces we are talking about that we witnessed, it does have the feel of a silent agreement. Like, okay, we'll get through this as gently as possible, as easily as possible. And that's not supposed to be part of the deal. And the people did not buy into this fight as that being part of the deal. They bought into this fight to see what people for 200 years, depending on where you trace the genesis of this sport, have been buying into fights, watching one man get in the ring against another man, to find out, how will I behave when the moment comes? What will my choice be? What choice will I make? Will I make the right choice to do everything I can to overcome what I have to overcome? To overcome what was in my life when I was young, to overcome the things that were told to me, to overcome the inhibitions that have been left over from those things that were told to me, to overcome all those shadows of a room that might be in the cobwebs, in the corners of my mind, that we've all had to deal with throughout our lives. Maybe some coach that said the wrong thing to you that he never should have said if he was a responsible coach, or maybe some irresponsible relative said to you, or maybe some bully said to you in the neighborhood that impacted you. But this is the night to clean the slate of all of that and to face another man trying to overcome you, trying to make you make the wrong choices, trying to make you say yes when you should say no, trying to make you say yes when you should say no, and giving you the right on that given night to always be able to demand the best from anybody else, the best from your children, the best from anybody around you, to demand it, to demand the truth, demand facing what's difficult to face, because you're going to face it. Because you're going to do just that, and you're going to lay out an example of just that. That's what that is. And he betrayed that.
Last
He
question,
betrayed
Teddy.
the idea of that.
The last question I have for you is there's a lot of people saying that they think that this has damaged boxing and it's actually hurt boxing. Do you think that's the truth, or do you think, no, boxing is going to be fine without it, but it didn't do well?
I'm going to be consistent. I'm going to be consistent with what I said before the fight. If I didn't say it, I would have been consistent with telling you that. Before the fight, with all the dribble and that travel and everything that was asked of me and everyone else, and we had to get answers about all that stuff. Before the fight, I said, yeah, right now, what do you think, Ted? I think it's great. I think right now that it's making the sport relevant. It's got us talking about the sport in a way we haven't talked about for decades. It's got a crossover effect of other people that are not rabid boxing fans interested in talking about this fight. Right now, it is one of the healthiest, greatest things that have come down the pike for this sport. But, and I did say it, there's another side to that coin. There always is. If this fight does not turn out to be close to the expectations, not the exact expectations, but close and satisfy people, there will be hell to pay. There will be ramifications, bad ramifications for the sport. It will hurt the future fighters that have not gotten theirs yet, that want to get theirs, want to make the money, want to make the fame, want to get the pay-per-view. It will hurt those fighters. It will hurt that market. It will hurt the sport, because the fans will say, you fooled me once, you fooled me twice, I came back. You fooled me 3 times, I came back. You fooled me for the 100th time now. I don't think I'm coming back. And I really believe that that's where we are right now. Listen, the sport's been around, as I said, a long time. It's as resilient as the cockroach and the shark. It's existed as long as, well, not quite as, those have been around a little longer than even boxing. But it's existed because of its resiliency. And it's existed because, again, of what it represents. What a person will get a chance to see when they watch it. Get a chance to see how somebody performs. What they will do when those moments come that we're all afraid of. When that moment comes that asks you, who are you? What are you? What are you willing to do? And everyone watches. All these phony actors from Hollywood, they all come out, they watch. Because they play those parts, but they don't live those parts. And they want to see, they want to smell, they want to feel, they want to sense what that really is. And they hope maybe some of it drops off on them. So yeah, the sport will survive, but it's been hurt. It's been hurt.
That's Teddy Atlas, who, as you just heard, absolutely never holds back, which is part of what makes him great. In addition to his work on ESPN, you can hear Teddy Atlas on his weekly radio program, Going the Distance, every Tuesday at 6 p.m. U.S. Canadian Eastern Time on Sirius XM Channel 92. John, a final point, and I'll give you a bit of a backstory on Mayweather versus Pacquiao and just the state of boxing in general here in the year 2015. So my entire family, we were invited to a fight party. There were kids there. There were older people. There was a really nice mix. Teenagers, it was a nice mix. It reminded me of fight parties I used to go to in high school in the 80s and the 90s. It was a really cool time. I hadn't been to a fight party in a long time. Family friendly. So I bring my wife, Kelly. I bring my 2 little girls, who I know you're big fans of. Ellie, my 9-year-old. Hadley, my 4-year-old. Hadley, like a lot of viewers around the world, promptly fell asleep in about the 4th round. Ellie and
she
John,
wasn't the only one.
John, you know my kids very well. So Ellie, she's 9. She's been training Muay Thai the last 18 months. She always likes to watch her dad on Bellator. I've taken her to a number of MMA events in Kansas City, including last month's Invicta. Right,
exactly.
which you refereed. So that's her frame of reference, is training Muay Thai. She's watched a couple of glories on Spike, mainly watching MMA. So as we're watching, she looks at me and she goes, "Dad, can they elbow?" And I said, "No, sweetie, they can't." She goes, "Well, I know they can't kick in boxing." And I said, "Yeah, that's right." And she said, "So all they can do is punch? This is boring." And I thought, wow. we come to boxing as almost our first combat sport. Really, I think people over the age of 25 or 30 come to it that way. But here's Ellie, who had never, ever watched boxing in her life. So she's coming to boxing from the reverse direction, from mixed martial arts and a bit of Muay Thai. And it was amazing, that perception. And I thought, this is a bad sign for professional boxing. Have they lost this entire generation of, say, kids up until the age of 15 years old who compare it to MMA, compare it to Muay Thai, compare it to kickboxing and say, this is really dull. They're just doing one thing. They're just punching.
Yeah, well, you know what? It's. I tell people all the time, it's the evolution. And what we're seeing is, when I was a kid growing up, which is a long freaking time ago, when I was a kid growing up, it was the changeover of skateboarding. We used to have steel wheels, then we had these like clay wheels, and then we got urethane wheels. And all of a sudden we were able to do things because the board would stick and it would be able to spin. And, my neighbor, I had two brothers, Frank and John Blood. That's a cool name no matter what anyone thinks. But they became these, unbelievable skateboarders, and they were doing, all of a sudden we were doing, instead of 360s, it was 720s. You would spin around twice. And then we started going into pools and doing stuff, and they became world champions. And the stuff that they did back then is so antiquated compared to what you watch people do now. I used to race motorcycles, and, we would cross it up and stuff. Guys are doing front flips on a motorcycle, back flips, double back flips. They're, doing things that are just, we never even considered. It was, if you were in that position, you were crashing, and that's what the kids today are used to. And what the difference between boxing and MMA is, there's just way more tools. And that's what Ellie's seeing is, she's saying they can only punch because that's all they can do. They've got two tools and they've got two targets. Where in MMA, we're talking about 14 targets with 11 tools to attack them with. There's so much that can happen in the fight. There's so many different elements that kids of today are looking at boxing as that's nothing compared to what MMA is. And, I get kids at my gym all the time, and I have a boxing program, and we got kids that are boxing. But a ton of the kids look and we say, why don't you go into the boxing program? Now that's pillow fighting. And that's exactly the words they used to me. That's pillow fighting. I go, that's not pillows. Those are pillows compared to an MMA glove. And that's the way they look at it. It's a different sport. They both sports have their place. And boxing is not going to die out. It's not going to die out because of, a snoozer fight between Manny Pacquiao and Floyd Mayweather. There will be great fights coming up that will entertain the fans. But if you're looking towards the future is kids associating with the sport that just has more elements, more tools, more zones to attack, more ways of ending the fight. It's the sport, if you're looking at combative sports, that's the sport of the future.
Time now for your questions. We always ask you to submit them. You have delivered around the world outstanding questions. Email us, info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. Of course, I plead with you every week. Please give me instructions on how to correctly pronounce your name. Patrick Gribbon or Gribbon, or he's from Canada. So
Gibbons, it's like a monkey. I'm sorry.
Maybe it's Gribbon. He didn't give me pronunciation guide, but Patrick, you know what? It's a great question, so you make the show.
Patrick
anyway.
G.
Patrick G. There you go. I'm going to say it's Gribbon, but we shall find out. Let me know, Patrick. But here's Patrick's outstanding question, John. There's a big debate among fans as to whether or not the low push kick to the thigh should be allowed in MMA. It is currently a legal strike, and we see John Jones use it often, as do his teammates Carlos Condit and Alistair Overeem. Many feel that this strike should not be legal as it can hyperextend the knee, cause damage, and is a quote-unquote cheap strike. Patrick continues, I think that reasoning is stupid because many leg locks can also do serious damage, and if a fighter does not want to be kicked that way, the simple answer is to train how to defend it. I think the controversy has more to do with the fact that John Jones uses that kick often and fans don't like him. Really good stuff.
It's a good, yeah. I think he answered his own question.
You think that's it? You think it's that simple with John Jones?
I think well, you know what? I can name you people in our sport that have been part of the sport for a long time that hate what we call linear kicks to the knee, that straight push to the knee of the fighter coming up. And I look at it and, you can think I'm wrong, but I think that anybody that sits there and thinks that we ought to get rid of that kick is as stupid as the person that wanted to put in downward pointed elbow strikes as an illegal strike. Okay, look at in that kick. No one goes into a fight with a straightened out leg. You know, we have a bend to our leg. It's amazing that we want to sit there and say that it's okay to punch and kick someone to the head, but I can't do this push kick to the knee. I can sit there and I can attack it with a knee bar. I can attack it with a heel hook, which is way more damaging. But those are okay, but we're going to say that we can't do this kick. It's ridiculous. It's the stupidest thing ever. You will never, ever get me to agree that that is something that should be taken out of the sport because some people say it's dirty or it's cheap. It's not. It's no different than a jab. Why do we jab someone to the face? To set up the other things that we want to do to them. That's what that kick is for. That is what John Jones has used it for. That's why he is so good. He's so talented in the way that he can go about using a variety of attacks to break down his opponent, which is his job. That's what fighting is about. Leave the knee strikes alone. They're good. Don't mess with them. Patrick G has it right. It's because people don't like certain fighters that utilize it.
Our next question comes from Last Real Man, which, of course, raises the issue. You can submit a screen name. That's cool. Last Real Man. That's easy to pronounce as well. So he asked, John, what do you think of UFC saying they're the fastest growing sport in the world, but not calling it MMA as it should be? Instead, they're calling the sport UFC.
Well, you know, the UFC is a promotion. You're right. They are a promoter of MMA. You're absolutely right again. But they're here to promote the UFC. They're here to promote the Ultimate Fighting Championship. And so they like to hear when people call it, oh, that you're talking about the UFC. You're talking about Ultimate Fighting. All those terms, you know, they want you to say that because it's like Kleenex. You know, when someone says, I want a Kleenex, are they saying they want a tissue? That's what they're saying, but they're using a brand name to identify it. And that's, you know, that's called great marketing. That's called, you know, being out in front of everyone else. And I don't blame them for pushing their name. That's their job. That's their promotion. And the more that they can push it forward in front of anyone else, you know, power be to them, man. They're doing their job.
John, our mutual good friend, Art Davey, the founder of the UFC, we had this conversation, oddly enough, 2 days ago, and I was saying it's such an iconic name. You'll read from the uninitiated people who will say, oh, he's an ultimate fighter. You know, someone who maybe is training in jiu-jitsu, they're an ultimate fighter. To the uninitiated, like you said, it's the tissue versus Kleenex argument. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had. Well, what's Bellator? Like people wandering around the hotel who aren't there for the fights. It's mixed martial arts. What's MMA? Do you know the UFC? Yeah. So you work for the UFC? No, I'm an MMA commentator for Bellator. What's MMA? Yeah, it just goes around and around in circles. But Bellator's been around since 2009. The UFC has been around since November 12th, 1993. And despite what happened in Japan before, I'm here to say, and I think you'll agree, what we call mixed martial arts began with UFC 1, November 12th, 1993.
Yeah, I think if you look at Lorenzo Fertitta and when he bought the UFC, because really what he was buying is, he was buying something that had debt. He had to pay off the debt too. And, they confronted him about, why are you buying this? And he said, for 3 letters, I want UFC. Man, I tell you what, that dude is a bright businessman who every time he puts his hands on something, he turns it to gold. And he turned the UFC into gold, and it's because of how smart he is as a businessman. He recognized long ago how important those 3 letters together were. They had some significance. Everything that came with what he was buying wasn't that important. Even the library of the past wasn't that big a thing. But he knew those 3 letters were because they resonated with people. People identified with it, and they understood the sport associated with those 3 letters. That's why the UFC does what it does.
Keep your excellent questions coming. Email us, info@letsgetitonpodcast.com, info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. Veronica Rothenhausler was announced her retirement from MMA at the age of 25 after just 2 pro bouts. Now, the reason that we're mentioning that a largely unknown fighter has left the sport is because of Rothenhausler's reason for doing so. In an interview with Mark Raymundi of MMAfighting.com, Rothenhausler said that in her last bout, a first-round TKO loss versus Charmaine Tweed in Invicta last September, she suffered her 5th concussion, the effects from which she is still feeling. Really unfortunate story, John, and I think one that needs to be told and one that needs to be discussed.
It does, and this is so important that people, this goes back to my job. This goes back to officiating and why referees stop fights and all these things that are going on and people saying, oh, no, let them fight to the end. You're not the person that has to live with the results. The fighter is. The fighter has to live as a different person sometimes, and that's what's happened to Veronica. I can tell you, I was there for Veronica's first pro fight. She fought a girl out of Extreme Couture, and Veronica was a big girl, coming in. She had to really cut down to get to 145, and she knocked out the girl from Extreme Couture. She had power, and she was fighting out of Team Alpha Male up in Sacramento. She had a bright future, and when you listen to Dana talking about some of these gyms, being Stone Age and stuff like this is what fighters need to start figuring out is you should not be getting concussed in a gym. If you're getting concussed in a gym, because look at how many pro fights did Veronica have there?
2.
Come on.
And
2.
5 concussions.
And 5 concussions. So where does that say she's being concussed? She's being concussed in the gym, which means that someone is not doing their job. The trainer's not doing their job. There's people that are sparring with her that are not doing their job. Inside the gym is not a fight. Inside the gym is a training atmosphere for people to learn how to be a fighter, learn what to do in a fight. And if you're being hurt as an athlete in a gym, you're in the wrong frickin' gym. I don't know what happened with Veronica, but something is wrong with the story when she says she has 5 concussions and she has 2 pro fights. And this is the issue that's going to be out there for our, sport, be it boxing or MMA. Concussions are a huge, factor in the way the rules are going to be, the way that things are going to be done, the way the medicals are going to be done, everything. This is coming off of all combative sports. You can look at hockey, you can look at football, look at the traumatic brain injuries that are occurring in every combative sport. And what it's doing to affect people. Look at Chris Holdsworth out of the same team, Team Alpha Male. This is a kid that won the Ultimate Fighter, and he hasn't been back in a while. Why? Because of concussions. Let's take a look at TJ Grant. TJ Grant is a great fighter. Here's a guy that worked his way up the rankings of the UFC to the point where he was the title contender. They were going to give him the match. He had the chance to be the UFC champion, and he couldn't take the fight based upon a concussion that he sustained in a fight that he won, and he still has not come back. Concussions change people. They change the person forever. Sometimes we've had a lot. I've discussed it before. We've had fighters never come back from a fight the same. They see things different. They do things different, and sometimes you got to point it out to them. And it's scary, but I've been in that position where I've shown actual fighters fights that they've had, and said, a true story. Frank Trigg is a guy that he's had a lot of fights. He was a top contender at one time, and he's turned himself into being a commentator, and now he's actually turning himself into being an official. And I've trained Frank to be a referee and a judge, and he's doing a great job. He's working with Camo out here in California with the amateurs. He's working in Vegas with Tough Enough, and he's doing a great job everywhere he's going. But I really had to work at getting him to understand you need to look at this sport like you're an official now. You're not a fighter, because fighters look at the fight different than the official is. And I actually took an old fight of his with Robbie Lawler, and I said, I want you to watch, I'm just going to show you one round of a fight, and I want you to see this round. And I didn't tell him what I was doing. I didn't tell him what fight I was going to show him, but I showed him that fight, that last round that he was in, where he gets knocked out. And I said, watch what this official does, right? Watch what he does. He's letting you get hit with shots that absolutely you should not have been hit with. And he even looked at me and he says, that fight changed me. And he has to live with that. He has to live with what occurred based upon one moment in a fight. And this is something that's, all fighters are taking the chance of, and all officials are trying to manage when they go in there with the fighters. We don't want those fighters being in that position like a Veronica, like a TJ, like a Chris, where maybe their careers are never going to continue on based upon that concussion happening in the fight, which sometimes we can do nothing to keep that from happening, but we can absolutely keep it from happening if it's happening in the gym.
John, I know you're a big NHL fan. Sidney Crosby, who I think is the best player in the National Hockey
Unbelievable.
League, nearly had his career wrecked from concussions. And I remember reading an article where when he came back to the Penguins after a very long layoff, Crosby said one of the most frustrating things was he could not be told medically when the concussion would clear up, that he knew that if he fractured his forearm or if he twisted his ankle or if he broke his femur, the doctors would give him a timetable. With concussion, it could be a day, it could be a year, it could be 5 years. Maybe you'll never be the same. Eric Lindros, another NHL player, had his career cut short maybe by a decade because of the effects from concussions. And you look at what's happening in the National Football League. In soccer, there's a huge emphasis now on concussions. And sometimes they don't present themselves until you're in your 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. And when we have Veronica Rothenhausler, she's 25 years old, and she's saying, after that loss last September in Invicta, I'm still feeling it. I need to find something else to do.
Yeah, and look at, I applaud Veronica and her decision and her maturity in saying, you know what, I've got to step away from this, because it's not an easy thing to step away from. Fighting is a drug to a lot of people, because there's things that you get out of it that you can't get anywhere else. And for her to take a look at the big picture and understand, you know what, I'm a different person right now. I'm not functioning the way I used to. I'm having these problems. I need to step away from this and possibly step away from it forever. That's a very mature decision on her part, and God bless her. The best of luck. I hope she gets better soon. I hope that the effects of the concussions go away and she returns to who she was. But this is a serious discussion. It's a serious element in our combative sports industries, and it's something that we've all got to work on to try to protect the athletes that are out there trying to entertain us.
John, final point on this. Do you think that in MMA in the next 5 years, we're going to see a real emphasis on concussions the way that we've seen in the NFL over the last 2 years?
Absolutely. The one thing that we've got going, and this is where I truly believe MMA is a more violent sport than boxing or football or any of those. When I say violent, it's because violence it's the open elements of what we allow to be done in MMA. We allow people to get punched. We allow them to get elbowed. We allow them to get kicked. We allow them to get picked up into the air and slammed onto their back or into their face, from sometimes a height of 6 feet or so. That's a violent element within our sport. Now, I don't think that our sport is as damaging truly as other sports. I don't think our sport is as damaging as boxing. And that's because for boxing, 90% of the blows are targeted at the head. And so the most important element any athlete has, although their body is everything as far as being able to do the things, their mind is what allows their body to work. And when the mind is becoming damaged, when the brain is getting damaged by the elements of the sport, it's going to change who that fighter is. It's going to change what they're able to do. And so we've got to work at, figuring out if there's, just elements of time. Let's say that, a person, we get used to, Mike Tyson walked into the ring every month when he was a young fighter and fought, 12 times in a year. And we thought really cool and great. That might not be that bad if you're Mike Tyson in those fights, because he wasn't really getting touched much. He wasn't getting hurt. But there might be an element that we're going to have to start putting into fights as far as how much damage did the fighter, take in the fight, even if they won. And let's say, that person is not allowed to come back for this amount of time. Now, we give suspensions right now based upon, knockouts, TKOs, different things where doctors are giving, 14-day, 30-day, 45-day, even 60-day suspensions, sometimes indefinite suspensions based upon the fighter going and seeing another doctor. But it might be that, it doesn't matter if they go and see another doctor. We're still not going to let them fight for a 90-day period or whatever, to try to get it to where the fighters are not taking the amount of abuse that is so consistent. They're giving time in between, because we know that time is absolutely an element in healing what's going on with them.
John and I are back with you next week for a brand new episode of Let's Get It On, first available on Friday. Download and subscribe to our podcast on the iTunes Store. For Android, download the Stitcher app and subscribe. And you can go straight to our website, letsgetitonpodcast.com. You can also find us on social media, facebook.com/letsgetitonpodcast, and on Twitter @PodcastMMA for this show, and for us personally, @JohnMcCarthyMMA and @Sean Wheelock. To ask us a question, make a comment, or inquire about becoming a sponsor of Let's Get It On, email us at info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. Again, that is info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. We're happy to say that we're gaining listeners around the world every week, and we want to keep growing, so please help us spread the word about this program. For John McCarthy, Teddy Atlas, and our producer Chris Lakin, I'm Sean Wheelock. Thanks very much for listening, everyone. This has been a presentation of Ignotainment Media Network, online at ignotainment.com.
Let's Get It On with Big John McCarthy and Sean Wheelock, only on the Ignotainment Media Network. Don't forget to leave a rating and review in the comments section of the iTunes Podcast Store. If you have questions, comments, or are interested in sponsoring the show, contact us at info@letsgetitonpodcast.com, or check out our additional lineup of podcasts, including Ocho Man, Behind the Eight Ball, The Whiskey Philosopher, and Youth Baseball Talk at ignotainment.com.